Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. You and I are standing at a place in the Holophase language where a lot of beautiful stories go to die. Because people get impatient. They learn a new operator, a new way to compute something, a new way to extract meaning from the phase story, and they rush to use it everywhere. They want a sentence that sounds universal, clean, powerful, like a law. And they forget the oldest rule of honest speech. Some tools only work in some places. If you've ever watched someone use a kitchen knife like a screwdriver, you already know the entire lesson of this part. A knife is not bad. It is sharp, precise, excellent. But it has a domain. A screwdriver has a different domain. When you mix them up, the tool doesn't merely give a wrong answer. It creates damage. It chips the blade. It strips the screw. It produces a mess you can't understand because you never admitted you were outside the tool's valid territory. That is what operator domain guards are. The discipline of saying out loud where your tool works before you pretend you've learned something about reality. And this is not a social nicety. In Pure Phi language, it is grammar. It is the difference between a sentence and a hallucination. Let me start with an image that is painfully ordinary. You're in a small town. There's a bridge with a sign. Maximum weight, 5 tons. Most people drive across without thinking. And then one day, someone shows up with a heavy truck and says, "A bridge is a bridge. Physics is physics. I'm sure it will be fine." They drive onto it. The bridge fails. Now notice something subtle. The bridge did not fail because the sign was a different physics. The bridge failed because the driver ignored the guard. The sign was not decoration. It was part of the bridge's meaning. The bridge is not a crossing. It is a crossing under these conditions. That is our rule in Holophase, spoken plainly. An operator is not just an operator. It is an operator together with its guard and its declared domain. Those three come as one unit. If you use the operator without the guard, you're not being brave. You're speaking nonsense in a confident voice. Now let's make the words clean. An operator is simply something you do to something else. You add, you subtract, you compare, you take a derivative, you normalize, you divide, you integrate along a loop, you extract a direction, you compute a ratio, you solve for something. Every time you do one of those, you have applied an operator. A domain is where the operator is defined, not where it feels nice, not where you wish it were defined, where it is actually meaningful. And a guard is the condition that tells you whether you are inside that domain at this point of the story. The simplest guard on earth is the one every child eventually meets. You cannot divide by 0. That is not a moral statement. It is not a preference. It is not a convention we could vote to change. It is a grammatical boundary. If you try it, you are not getting infinity. You are living the language. And in Holophase, we have many temptations that are basically division by 0 wearing a fancy costume. Because once we build the first derivative word, what we call the one form A, meaning the derivative of the lifted phase, the world became readable as change. Then we learned the triunity readout rule. Time cadence, spatial texture, and kinematic transport are not separate gods. They are 3 inseparable shadows of that same change word. And right there, the seduction begins. Someone says, if I have cadence, I can define a natural time parameter. Someone says, if I have texture, I can define a direction of steepest variation. Someone says, if I have transport, I can define a normalized flow. And then they quietly do something dangerous. They normalize. They divide by magnitude. They assume a denominator is non-zero. They assume a direction exists uniquely. They assume a choice is stable. They assume away a degeneracy. But Part 26 just taught us, even inside the clean domain D, where lifting and jets are legal, there are places where the readouts collapse. Cadence can vanish. Texture can vanish. The rank of the derivative can drop. Second derivatives can become ambiguous. Those are not errors. Those are typed regimes. They are places where the language must change grammar. So part 27 is the lock that prevents us from lying to ourselves at those boundaries. Because without guards, every degeneracy becomes a fake universe. And fake universes are easy to build. They are built from silent assumptions. Let me show you what I mean with a human scale example that is almost embarrassing in its simplicity. A friend asks you for advice. You say, "Be honest." That sounds noble. It sounds clean. It sounds universal. But you and I both know there is a missing line, a guard. Be honest. When honesty is safe enough not to destroy someone. Be honest. When the person is capable of hearing it. Be honest. When the context is not a courtroom trap. Be honest. When you have enough information not to accuse unfairly. Be honest. When you are not using honesty as a weapon. If you leave those guards silent, your advice becomes a fake universe. It works beautifully inside the domain where the guards hold, and then it collapses outside it, and the person thinks reality betrayed them. It didn't. The sentence was illegal. Now scale that up to history. A leader says, "Markets correct themselves." This is the same kind of sentence. It is an operator applied to a world. The operator let the system equilibrate. The domain, conditions of liquidity and trust and stable rules. The guard, no sudden panic, no structural break, no hidden coupling that turns a small shock into a cascade. When those guards are violated, the statement doesn't become a little inaccurate. It becomes nonsensical. And then people invent new primitives, mystical ones, because they cannot admit the real problem. The model had hidden guards, and the system crossed the boundary. Now scale that down to biology. A label on a bottle says, "Take twice daily." Hidden guard. For 10 days. Not for 1 day. Not forever. Hidden guard. With food, not on an empty stomach. Hidden guard. Unless allergic. Hidden guard. Unless kidney function changes. Hidden guard. Unless interacting with another drug. When people ignore guards, the drug doesn't become a little less effective. It becomes dangerous. The body is not breaking the rule. The instruction was never universal. This is why I like calling this part the discipline of honest speech. Because guards are not just technical. Guards are humility made grammatical. Now, inside Pure Phi language, the stakes are even sharper because we have a strict seal. We are not allowed to import space-time furniture, not allowed to import forces, not allowed to import new objects to fix our discomfort. We are only allowed phi, local lifts of phi to a real valued function on lift valid patches. The first derivative word A as the derivative of that lift. Finite jets when properly typed, excise domains, and topological tokens like winding and holonomy and defect charges and linking rules. That means if something seems to blow up, we cannot rescue ourselves by saying, maybe there's a new field. In PS0 purity, we have to first ask, did we use an operator illegally? Did we forget a guard? Did we speak outside the domain? Most of the time, that is the entire mystery. So let's make the core sentence you should carry like a talisman. If an operation is not defined everywhere, you must attach its guard and its domain to the sentence as part of its meaning. There are no silent divisions. There are no hidden normalizations. There is no pretending. Now, you might ask, how do we recognize partial operations? How do we spot them in the wild? Here's a quick way to feel it, without turning this into a checklist. Anytime you are tempted to say the direction of something, you are probably hiding a guard, because directions often require a non-zero magnitude. Anytime you are tempted to say per unit, you are probably hiding a denominator. Denominators demand guards. Anytime you are tempted to normalize, you are dividing by a magnitude. Magnitudes can be zero. Guards. Anytime you are tempted to claim uniquely defined, you are probably crossing a degeneracy. Guards. And in holophase specifically, anytime you want to extract a pure cadence or pure texture or pure transport, you are tempted to treat one readout as a ruler for the others. That is where guard discipline protects triunity. Because triunity says, even if we focus on cadence for a moment, texture and transport are not gone. They are present simultaneously. And when cadence vanishes, it is not only a time problem, it is a structural type of the whole change word. Let's walk through a concrete holophase flavored temptation, but spoken in audio-friendly language. Suppose you say, I will define a local time parameter by using cadence as my clock. In plain language, you are trying to use the rate of change of phase as a time ruler. Guard 1. Cadence is not zero on the domain where you do this. Guard 2. Your chosen patch actually allows a lift because derivatives require lifting. Guard 3. The definition is stable under the allowed equivalencies, meaning if I shift the lift by an integer number of full turns, or shift phi by a constant, I don't change the meaning. If you do not speak those guards, what happens? The moment cadence becomes zero, at a still point, at a plateau, at a critical regime, your time becomes undefined. And if you keep speaking as though time is still defined, you have invented a fake universe where the still point is forced to behave like a moving point. That is not a discovery, that is a grammar violation. Now do the same with texture. Suppose you say, I will define a direction of steepest texture. You are extracting an arrow from the spatial aspect of A. Guard 1. Texture is not zero on your domain. Guard 2. The derivative has the rank needed to support the notion of a direction, because rank drops make direction ambiguous. Guard 3. The definition does not depend on the coordinate chart you used, because if it changes under chart change, it is not semantic. It is a coordinate artifact. Again, if you hide these, you will create a fake universe at the precise places where the map folds. You will claim a unique direction at a perfectly flat plateau. It's not wrong physics, it is wrong language. And now transport. Suppose you say, I will define a normalized transport flow. You want a unit vector, a pure direction of motion-like readout. Guard 1. The object you normalize is not the zero object. Guard 2. The degeneracy set is excluded or handled by a different invariant. Guard 3. The definition recombines to the full change word A when you restore the triunity, meaning you have not smuggled in an independent primitive. Because remember, omega, kappa, and nu are readouts. They are not separate substances. If you define something that cannot be reassembled into A, you have created a new primitive in disguise. That brings us to the 4 gates. But I'm not going to recite them like an instruction manual. I'm going to let you feel them as the natural hygiene of a serious language. The first gate is well-formedness. In this part, well-formedness means you do not write an operator without its guard. If the operation is partial, the guard is not optional. The guard is part of the sentence. A sentence without it is not shorter. it is undefined. The second gate is invariance. If your guard depends on the way you describe the situation, then it is not a real guard. A real guard is stable under admissible redescription. In holophase terms, it must survive gate shifts of phi by a constant, lift shifts by full turns, char changes, and admissible deformations inside the clean domain. If the guard changes when you restate equivalently, then the sentence never had meaning. It was tied to notation. The third gate is domain. You must name the domain. This is the part many people resist because it feels like weakness. But in holophase, domain is meaning. You cannot say this holds without saying where it holds. The domain might be the clean domain D, or D minus the degeneracy set, or a lift valid patch, or a region with declared regularity class. Without that, you are not saying anything precise enough to be public. And the fourth gate is the non-encodability challenge. This is where we resist the temptation to patch over our own illegal sentence by inventing a new primitive. If your operator fails at a degeneracy and you respond by introducing a new object whose only purpose is to make your operator work everywhere, you must prove that object cannot be expressed using PS0 tokens. And most of the time, you can't. Most of the time, the truth is simpler and harsher. You used an illegal operator, and the universe is not obliged to make your favorite ratio defined. Now I want to give you a story that connects this to the deeper arc of episode 13b. Why we're doing this at language level, before any dynamics, before any cosmogenesis. Because you might feel a pressure in your chest right now. But in physics, we often define things by dividing, normalizing, parametrizing. Isn't that how we get traction? Yes, later. But later we are allowed to build disciplined protocols, to install measurement windows, to talk about tailies, to do dynamics. Here, right now, we are freezing the grammar so we can cheat later. We are installing the rules that prevent us from manufacturing laws out of undefined expressions. If you do not install Gal discipline at the language level, you can always fake coherence by ignoring the places where your operators break. You can make any model look universal simply by refusing to look at its boundary. That is why this part matters. This part prevents fake universes. And fake universes don't just mean silly theories. They mean anything that claims to be about reality while quietly relying on hidden conditions. Now let's scatter some analogies across the scales, the way reality itself scatters them. In everyday life, guards are everywhere. A recipe says, bake at 200 degrees. Hidden guard. 200 degrees in the oven, not 200 degrees in boiling oil. Not 200 degrees on a metal pan on an open flame. Not 200 degrees with the fan blasting. Hidden guard. Your thermometer is accurate. Hidden guard. Altitude. Hidden guard. The dish is in the correct container. When people fail at cooking, they often say, the recipe lied. No, the recipe had guards you didn't see. The recipe belonged to a domain you were not in. In human relationships, guards are the difference between care and cruelty. I need to talk to you. Guard. When you have privacy, when you are not exhausted, when you are not in front of the children, when you are not about to walk into an exam. The sentence is not weaker because it has a guard. It is kinder and more precise. In history, constitutions are guard systems. A law says freedom of speech. Guard. Within jurisdiction. Guard. Not incitement. Guard. Not threats. Guard. Not fraud. Every society fights over guards, not because guards are bad, but because guards define the domain of the operator called rights. Without guards, rights become slogans. With guards, rights become enforceable. In biology, homeostasis is guard discipline embodied. Your body runs countless operators: convert food to usable energy tallies, regulate pH, regulate temperature, regulate glucose. Every one of these operators has domains. Outside the domain, the operator fails. That failure is what we call illness. And what does medicine do? It doesn't blame the operator for failing in a domain it was never designed for. It restores the domain, or it switches the operator. That is exactly what Part 26 taught us with degeneracy. At certain regimes, you switch grammar. In the microscopic world, even the simplest rate concept requires guards. To define a rate of change, the function must be differentiable on the patch you are speaking on. There is a guard. If the function is not differentiable at a point, if it has a kink, the derivative operator is not defined there. You can approximate. You can use a different operator, but you cannot pretend the derivative exists because it would be convenient. In the cosmic scale, you see the same discipline in mapping. Astronomers use different models for different regimes because the operators differ in domain. When a model fails, the honest move is not to declare the cosmos irrational. The honest move is to ask, did our operator cross its domain boundary? Now bring it back to pure Phi language. We have the phase field Phi that assigns to each event a position on the circle. We have local lifts where we can unwrap that circle into a real valued function, but only locally, only on patches where that is legal. We have A, the derivative of that lifted phase. We have finite jets when we have typed regularity. We have the excise domain D where derivative sentences are legal. We have defects and charges and linking, which are global grammar tokens. We have degeneracy sets inside D where certain readouts collapse. With all that structure, the number one way to accidentally cheat is to perform a partial operation silently. To normalize without saying what happens when the magnitude vanishes. To divide without excluding the zero set. To invert without declaring that inversion fails at singular points. To declare a direction without acknowledging the direction is undefined at a flat point. To use a shortcut identity that assumes conditions you did not declare. Part 27 is the firewall against that. And there is a very beautiful consequence, a kind of harsh purification. When you enforce guards, many discoveries collapse. Not because the world becomes boring, but because many apparent miracles were just typing errors. They were conclusions drawn from expressions used outside their domain. The moment you attach guard and domain honestly, the miracle evaporates. And what remains is a smaller, clearer statement that actually means something. This is not pessimism. This is how rigorous knowledge is born. It's like a sculptor chipping away marble. The point is not to add more stone. The point is to remove the parts that never belonged to the statue. Now, there is a falsifier here as well, and it's important because it keeps us from turning guards into superstition. Sometimes people add guards that are not real. They add guards that depend on their method, or on their preferred coordinate chart, or on a branch cut they chose arbitrarily. Those are not semantic guards. Those are artifacts. So the strict challenge is this. If you can rewrite the guard in an equivalent way and the meaning changes, then the guard was never part of reality. It was part of your notation. This is exactly like the branch cut discipline we learned earlier. True invariance cannot depend on where you drew your bookkeeping line. Guards must be like that too. If a guard is real, it survives redescription. If it does not, it is not a guard. It is a costume. Now let's close the main story with the human moment, because in an audio script you need a memory hook that lands in the body. Think of the last time you felt betrayed by a rule, a life rule, a motivational rule, a piece of advice, something that sounded universal and then failed. Usually, if you look closely, the rule had a hidden guard. Work hard and you will succeed. Guard. In a system where effort is rewarded, where corruption does not dominate, where you have access, where the timeline is long enough, where health holds, where the goal is well defined. Say yes to opportunities. Guard. When you are not already drowning. Follow your heart. Guard. When your heart is not in chaos, when your responsibilities are accounted for, when your understanding is mature enough. When those guards are missing, the advice becomes a fake universe, and the collapse feels personal. It feels like you failed. But the deeper truth is simpler. You were handed an unguarded operator. You were asked to divide by zero in real life. Holophase does not let us do that. Not because we want to be pedantic, but because we want the language to match the world. And the world is guarded. Reality does not allow every operation everywhere. It allows some operations here and other operations there. Sometimes it asks you to excise a domain. Sometimes it asks you to switch grammar. Sometimes it gives you invariants that survive. Sometimes it gives you only local statements, not global ones. Sometimes it gives you closure and integers. Sometimes it gives you still points and ambiguity. But it never gives you permission to pretend. So here is what you should carry forward from part 27 in one breath. A valid sentence in Pure Phi language is not operator applied to object. It is operator with its guard on its declared domain, stated in a way that does not depend on notation, and that remains honest when the triunity readouts collapse. And here is the bridge that naturally follows, because now that we understand guards, a new question becomes unavoidable. What happens when we chain guarded operations? If I apply one guarded operator and then another, what is the combined guard? How do the domains compose? How do we prevent a subtle cheat where each step is legal, but the composition silently crosses a boundary? That is where we go next. But before we step there, let me give you a concise closing summary, spoken cleanly, the way a listener can remember. Operator domain guards are the discipline of honest speech. Any operation that is not defined everywhere must carry its conditions and its domain as part of its meaning. In Pure Phi language, this prevents fake universes built from silent assumptions, silent divisions, silent normalizations, silent claims of uniqueness at degeneracies. Guards must be well-formed, stable under admissible redescription, and tied to an explicit domain. And when someone tries to invent new primitives to avoid guards, the non-encodability challenge demands proof. Enforcing guards doesn't shrink reality. It purifies our claims until what remains is truly semantic, truly invariant, and truly inside the language. Always. Peace be upon you.